Well, hey, welcome to Jayhawk Wednesday. Visual aid for the day. This was Julie's cheerleading jacket that she wore. Vintage from 1981. I mean, is that great? That's just classic. That is so vintage. So, that was Julie's jacket from 1981. Hey, by the way, just giving you a rummy update. Julie's increased her lead. It's 34 to 28, so she's a touchdown and a missed extra point ahead of me. So it's looking bleak. So we're going into the fourth quarter here, and so I need to catch up. Um, Question: what nickname would you give each other, and why? What nickname would you give each other, and why? Maybe you've seen something in each other, and not something to tear each other down. Hopefully, you'll create some nicknames for each other that are uplifting. Okay, let's lay down the ground rules. The nickname you give each other needs to be uplifting. So, what nickname would you give each other, and why? We've been looking at Jesus' first lessons post resurrection. We know people weren't looking for the resurrection. But also, there must have been something about Jesus' appearance post resurrection that made it difficult to recognize him. And we know of some situations where Jesus didn't want people to recognize him. Um, Interesting, though, the pattern, it seems as though the disciples refused to believe. They just couldn't let themselves go there. I want you to look with me at Mark chapter 16, just verses 9 and 11. It says, "Now after he had risen early on the first day of the week, he first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out seven demons." Verse 10. She went and reported those who had been with him, while they were mourning and weeping. And verse 11, and get their response. "And when they heard that he was alive, and had been seen by her, they refused to believe it." They refused to believe. Obviously, I mean, this wasn't something easy to believe, but why? Could it be because their experiences said, you know what, there's nothing that has ever happened like this before, so therefore it can't happen now? Or could it be that if this is true, well, the ramifications are they're going to have to live differently in the future. They're going to have to do something. If the resurrection is true, that's going to demand something from them. See, to believe something carries with it responsibility. Because if something is true, well, what am I going to do with it? Look with me at verses 12 through 13. It says, "And after that, Jesus appeared in a different form to two of them." This seems to be kind of a summary of the road to Emmaus, which we're going to look at more in detail tomorrow. But he appears to two of the disciples, doesn't identify them here. And these two disciples were walking along their way in the country. Verse 13, "And they went away and reported it to others." But again, after these two saw Jesus and they reported it to others, but those others they reported to did not believe them either. Again, you see this same pattern. People aren't willing to believe. Three observations. Why don't people allow themselves to believe? Well, here's the first. Again, to believe something carries with it responsibility on our part. Because if this is true, well, and we choose to believe it, then we've got to do something with it. And if you believe that Jesus conquered death, then that is a truth that's worth us telling others about. We can't keep that one a secret. So that demands some application. If Jesus rose from the grave, we've got to get the word out, because this is better than the cure for polio. This is better than any sort of viral cure, because this is a vaccination that is the only vaccination that would cure people well beyond the grave. So, second observation, we often say in our culture, seeing is believing. Well, that's not necessarily true, because you've got example after example of disciples who are seeing Jesus, but they're still doubting. They're still not believing. I think it's the other way around. I think once we believe, then we see. Evidence, eyewitness testimony, really wasn't enough. The intervention of God is what pushed people over the edge to believe. And I think that's still true today. We believed once Jesus reached out of heaven and pushed us over the edge. See, the big idea of this post-resurrection lesson is God is getting his disciples to walk by faith and not by sight. See, because he won't be there with them physically in the future. No longer can they walk with him by sight. So now they're going to have to walk with him by faith. And it's difficult to believe that. Well, here's a great question for all of us to contemplate. What are the hardest things about your future to believe God for? What are you having a hard time believing God for? You know, everybody's getting involved in, what's causing this, and the conspiracy theories, and is this the end of times? And really, none of us know. But really, doesn't it come back to the fact that, wait, are we going to trust God in the midst of it or not? Because even if every one of the conspiracy theories you hear is true, well, Jesus is still the answer. And Jesus is the one who overcame the world. And Jesus is the one who delivers us into eternity. So what in the midst of this is the hardest thing for you to trust God about? What's the hardest thing about your future to believe God for? Well, have a great Wednesday. And again, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning for another snippet.